As oil continues to pour out of the damaged BP well in the Gulf of Mexico, we ask, when will all of this end? What does the continued pollution of the waters mean to all of us living in the Gulf Coast region? How and when will this leak be stopped? And what is the latest cleanup plan? Tonight, are the government and BP doing everything they can to secure the area and our future? I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. On April 20th, BP's Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded into flames, eventually crashing into the ocean, claiming the lives of 11 employees, and discharging thousands of gallons of oil immediately into the Gulf of Mexico. April 24th, the Coast Guard reports oil leaking at the rate of 1,000 barrels or 42,000 gallons a day. 4 days later, the Coast Guard recalculated the oil spill to 5 times the original estimate. April 29th, as the spill grows to the size of Delaware and Rhode Island combined, nearly 33 miles of floating booms and 100,000 gallons of dispersant are deployed by the Coast Guard. May 3rd, BP states that they will pay for the cleanup. May 5th, BP successfully seals the smallest of 3 leaks. May 7th, with much anticipation and hope, a 125-ton containment dome is lowered into the water. May 8th, the dome fails. May 12th, videos of the leak are released, and experts question the previous calculations. New estimates quadruple earlier beliefs, suggesting oil flowing at 12 to 25,000 barrels a day. May 16th, BP successfully installs apparatus collecting between 1,000 and 5,000 barrels of oil per day, less than 25% of the escaping oil. May 25th, preparations are made for the top kill maneuver, which would inject concrete into the damaged well. May 29th, top kill fails. May 31st, the cap containment system is deployed, hoping to cut off the damaged pipe at the base of the underwater drill site and cap it in an attempt to better control the flow. June 7th, video evidence suggests that even with the cap in place, the flow is stronger than ever. June 14th, sensors placed on the gushing cap now estimate the flow at 1.7 million gallons of oil per day, a rate of release equal to the Exxon Valdez spill every 4 days. In addition to the 11 lives lost, nearly 90,000 square miles of the Gulf's waters are now closed to fishing, costing an estimated $2.5 billion to that industry. Add to that the incalculable damage to the environment, devastating the Gulf, the wetlands, and all types of marine life. To date, BP has spent around $1.5 billion in its response to this crisis, trying to stop and contain an oil spill that now has grown larger than the size of Lake Michigan and continues to grow. Joining us tonight are Dr. Michelle Foss, Chief Energy Economist Program Manager, Bureau of Economic Geology, University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Jeffrey Wozniak, Research Fellow at Texas Research Institute for Environmental Studies, Sam Houston State University. And Dr. Don Van Nieuwenhuise, Director, Petroleum Geoscience Programs, University of Houston. Welcome to all of you. Right before we went on air, Michelle, you had said that maybe we're getting media overkill on this whole story. Let's talk a little about that.
We're getting media overkill on misinformation and not enough information, that's for sure. But I do worry that when you have an intense news item like this, which is actually overwhelming a lot of other news items, that to a certain extent people start to become a little numb and aren't thinking about all of the different aspects of this situation that are going to have to be dealt with. And I think that the other thing that it tends to do is it drives people towards emotional responses and not cool-headed, rational ones, which is what I think is kind of overwhelming right now in the political arena for sure. And so, you know, it's a typical media cycle, I think. Mm-hmm. You know, you ramp up when something happens and an issue comes to the forefront and everyone is struggling to understand it and deal with it. But after a while, I mean, it's just really hard for people to continue to stay engaged.
Well, Don, let me ask you. I mean, you've been around in the media. Everyone is seeing you out there talking about it. Your feeling on that?
I kind of agree with that, and I think one of the most difficult things that for most people to grasp is that a lot of what we hear is hype, and there are people trying to make the disaster sound as bad as they possibly can, but that's not to say that it's not a horrible disaster.
Right.
It's just that, it's hard to collect the facts. Right after the accident, I had some of my students call in from rigs with rumors, and I told them right away, when the early information we get is probably rumors, we'll collect some of these rumors, and as we hear them and they start to collaborate one another, we'll be able to figure out what the facts are. And I think a lot of people have overlooked many of the facts, and just following it in the news, I will hear information released, and then 3 days later someone will say that it hadn't been even expressed yet, and yet a lot of that information's already been clearly spelled out and even put online in some cases.
Well, I know even in doing our setup package where we opened the show with our story, finding the facts we used was a very tricky path to go down because you find varying information. We hope that we grasp the majority of it as accurately as possible. But even in our piece, we could say between 12 and 25,000 barrels. Yeah, I mean, it's such a large gap between the two of them.
And I also agree that with the hype factor, you hear so much about this right now. The trick, though, is what's going to happen after the oil is shut off. Are we still going to hear about the restoration, the mitigation of the damage that's been done? So often in media, we have events occur, and then down the road, you end up not hearing about what goes on behind the scenes a year, 2 years, possibly even decades later. And I wish we would see more of that media coverage post-event as we move forward.
And we're getting a little now even of Exxon Valdez and how long that cleanup, which is still going on as I understand it.
But also how much success there's actually been in recovery, although perhaps you would want to say more about that. But, I mean, to a large extent, ecosystems are resilient, and the Gulf Coast is, in my view, it's my own opinion, I guess, as a scientist, is a fairly resilient ecosystem. And the things that I worry about actually have nothing to do with this spill or even this industry. It's a whole raft of other things that impact the Gulf of Mexico from an ecological point of view, a fisheries management point of view, coastal preservation point of view that just has gotten snowed with all of this. I think people think that this is the major thing that impacts the region, right? In terms of the quality of the ecosystem.
But it is devastating at this point.
It's a shock, that's for sure. It's a shock. But,
the short-term effects alone of this are huge. And you are right. These systems, these ecosystems are extremely resilient. But what you have to bear in mind is it's like a prize fight. Second, third round, you can get up, but by the end of the match, sometimes it's hard to get back up. And we can't keep pushing these very pristine and untouched systems to the point where they're unable to recover.
Right.
And I fear that with more events that occur like this, we tend to start going down that path.
Okay, let's try and talk a little bit about the spill itself to start us off with, and to understand where are we at as far as stopping it. Is there a stop in sight, or is it going to have to be the 2 relief wells that are being drilled will be the only thing that will stop this?
Well, I think the sure bet there is the kill wells or the relief wells are the sure bet. And I've worked on relief wells before, and most of the time we'll hit them the very first strike, and it works very well. And I have a lot of faith in that working. Of course, they do too. And of course, the reason BP started the kill wells right away is because they know it takes a long time.
You say right away, and I was just looking through the timeline of how things happened. It was almost 4 weeks after the fire before they started the relief well. Is that right away in the oil industry, or was there a lag?
I was looking more at when the licensing occurred. They had to get it licensed first to drill those, and they also had to acquire the equipment to do it.
And I ask the question because I think we are so removed from what it really takes to do these things. We can look on a piece of paper, and if it says 4 weeks, we feel like it wasn't immediate.
Right.
So from your expertise, was it a quick response?
Well, from a standard response, it was quick. However, I do believe that in the future what they should do is have equipment available that's ready to mobilize right away so that they don't have to wait for things to be available. Okay. For example, some of the rigs that they have, they actually acquired them from other companies that had them under contract, and so there are other companies that have helped out by providing a lot of the equipment that's being used, some of the rigs and some of the vessels. And that's a really important logistical aspect of all of this, because you have to move a lot of equipment, and a lot of material to run one of these wells and to actually drill a kill well.
Is there, from your point of view, from your opinion, a witch hunt going on in trying to lay blame? Should that be going on at this point?
I really don't think so, and I hope you agree with this, but
we'll find out.
But I do think that there's a lot of blame out there, obviously, and I think the most important thing right now is for people to pull together, for the companies to pull together, for the government to pull together, for BP to pull together, with everybody pulling together to try to solve this serious problem. And as you mentioned before we went on the air, the issue of it kind of being our responsibility, because we're the ones that use a lot of this product from the oil in terms of gas and other energy needs that we have in this country. I think it's important that we all take a responsibility in this and try to pull together. I think it's, again, there's sort of a spectator sport to stand at the beach and watch the oil come in, and I would have a hard time myself just standing there and watch it come in. I would probably be out there picking it up with whatever I had.
Yeah.
And I think it's it's everyone's responsibility.
Michelle, let me go over to you. I know you have a response to this.
Well, as I mentioned when we were getting organized, I was a witness in the House Natural Resources full committee meeting on May 27th. So I have a bit of a different opinion. I think that, as usual in situations like this is not unusual. I think people are looking for certain advantages. And I think that actually, if not managed the right way, can undermine all of the good efforts that Don mentioned that people really are trying to do to become better organized and have better management of the situation, clean up, and for the forward thinking, especially to get on the same page about what the right things are to do after all of this. I had real mixed emotions after that hearing. On the one hand, really concerned about the political management side of things. On the other hand, I left feeling a bit encouraged that there are some people in our government, mainly, and certainly on the industry front, because that's where the pressures are, who really are thoughtful and are really trying to think about things the right way. But they are really going to have to work hard to keep things level and really constructive, I think.
Jeffrey, I want to bring you in at this point. If you want to comment on that before I ask you the next question.
No, I agree as well. And I think the way we need to deal with this is activity can be going on in several different circles at the same time. If policymakers want to do what they do, fine. As long as it doesn't detract from what's going on the ground, because this is the key time. This is where we need to be out there. We have an idea with forecasting where the oil's going. We can get out on the marsh now and take some really nice steps before it even gets there to better protect the system. So different circles, different theaters of events is what we see.
Okay, now, if we go by the idea that these relief wells are what's going to finally stop the flow, that's still 2 months away. What is happening in that period of time? What are we going to expect to see?
Well, unfortunately, with obviously the greater amount of time that goes on, the more oil that's going to pile up on those beaches. When you look at the ecological response, the higher the concentration of oil per unit area of marsh, the more there is, the more drastic the response. One term we like to use is persistence. With time comes heightened persistence. The ecosystems are resilient, but when it is a persistent spill and it continues to lap on shore, we start to see more of a drastic response through the vegetation, plants, and animals in the area. So,
I mean, they're easy to see because we can see the pictures. We can see the birds covered in oil. We can see the marshland getting covered over. But what is actually happening to the ecosystems while this is going on?
You hit the nail on the head. We all see the pictures of the birds and the pelicans and whatnot covered in oil. And yes, that is a legitimate part of this. But these coastal wetlands are just so integral in buffering nutrient outwelling to the deeper water of the Gulf. They're habitats for fishes that live in the Gulf. So with each day that goes on with the increased oil, it definitely continues to affect a lot of lower level ecosystem processes.
There's talk of the plumes, these oil plumes down under. What is that exactly?
Well, what most of it is the oil has multiple components, and some of them are heavier than others. Some of them are close to the density of water. and because of that, they'll rise more slowly through the water column. And some of them get actually fairly close to the density of water, so just a change in the temperature of the water could actually slow down the pace of its rising. Also, the dispersants actually break it up into smaller bubbles or globs of oil, and of course, the smaller it is, the more surface area you have per the buoyant force that it's going to apply, and therefore it'll rise even slower. If you're a scuba diver, you know that your large air bubbles will rise faster than your small air bubbles from your tank and your regulator. And so when you disperse it, you actually slow down the process of some of these bubbles rising. So even though most of them are rising, some of them may be rising very slow, and of course a warm layer of water could actually be less dense and actually capture them in a layer below the warmer water and kind of entrap it like that. We see this in lake systems. I've worked in a lot of lake systems in the past, and you get thermal layers and salinity layers that have different densities, and you can trap all sorts of things in between those layers.
Better the devil you know question. Is it better to have an oil slick on top of the water? Is that easier to deal with, or is it better to have the plumes? Does one cause more damage than the other?
I think that depends on who you ask.
Yes.
I fear that it's an out-of-sight, out-of-mind situation where if that oil is dispersed out in the open water where we usually see dispersants being used, it's still going to settle out. It's still going to settle to the bottom of the Gulf, and there's still a lot of life. There's still a lot of fish spawning that occurs out in those deeper water areas, and we don't get the pictures. Again, coming back to the media, we don't see that actually occurring.
Yeah, but you know, it will be a small component of the overall oil, because a lot of the oil is lighter, and most of it will rise. But some of the heavier components will sink to the bottom, and it's usually the tarry, waxy ones that are not necessarily that good for wildlife.
I don't want us to lose sight of the bigger picture, though. Because this has happened, and this is yet another reminder that our wetland systems are weaker than they should be because we don't take care of them in the first place. We do things that causes net wetlands loss rather than wetlands gain. If you look at our Mississippi Delta system and how it should function. I was in Louisiana the week of May 19th, roughly. The marshes are not in good shape. They were under a lot of salt water following the hurricanes. There's been a lot of damage to the understory. And those are the kinds of things that people really need to think about. If you have healthy marsh, the resilience is much better, at least as far as the wetlands part of the equation goes. So why don't we have that? Well, it's because we need to still sit down and figure out all of the things that we haven't figured out yet, following all of the past experiences we've had, and really understand our systems down here and what makes them strong and robust and
so
what we
how
need to do
with all of this that we've spoken about do you actually clean this up? We've seen burns, we've heard about the dispersants. What actually really works in a situation like this, and why don't the burns work? Why aren't we just burning it all off?
Well, it really depends on where you are. It depends when you think with the coastal wetlands. Sometimes burning in a coastal wetland, if you look back to the research and literature, it actually shows that burns can be effective in coastal marsh areas.
But couldn't you have burned it before it got to the wetlands? And I know very little. You all know much more about this than I do, but it seems as though the burn-off would have been easy to do, not easy, but relatively easier to do while it was still out in the Gulf before it got to the wetlands. Why wasn't that more aggressively attacked?
You have to control it, first of all, and then you get other effects. And so, rightfully so, everyone's a little cautious. There's, a lot of anxiety about doing something now, but I think you also sort of have to think through what it is exactly that you may end up with. You don't want to end up with a bigger problem or a worse problem or something that you can't deal with. Large-scale burns of the type that we're doing now and that people are talking about for this, I don't know if they've really been done before. And we haven't, these situations don't happen, which is the first point.
Yeah, they've done some of this in the Gulf War. But,
yes, exactly.
But
so I don't, but I think that to me, when in talking with all of the people we've talked to, like Jeffrey, who are in the wetlands research area and thinking about this, or have experience with marine ecosystems and are thinking about it, I think that this is to a certain extent experimentation to try to resolve situations, and so
Don, cleanup?
Well, in the one of the issues, of course, is, and it's been mentioned, and that is you have to do a control burn. You have to be very careful.
Mm-hmm.
You need to make sure that the burn's not bigger than you want it to be because you have a lot of vessels out there.
Right.
And, of course, the immediate thought is the more vessels I get out there to skim, the more I can rope off and burn. But then you have more vessels you have to worry about being caught in the crosswinds. And even the boom, some of the booms that they were using for the flare, they had to worry about it when the wind changed direction, whether it was going to hit one of the other vessels out in the capture and kill process going on. So that you have to be very careful with any kind of burn, because if it gets out of control, you've got another serious problem. And I think the caution in the wetlands, of course, is the marshes. Some of the marsh grass could be dry, and you could actually start fires and that sort of thing. So you don't want to compound the problem.
As horrible as this sounds, I'm sure there are people out there that are thinking, I really don't care about the wetlands. What I care about is the economy. What's this doing to us? You know, they're swamps. Who needs them? You know, we need to worry about gas prices. We need to worry about my job. We need to worry about the fishing industry. What is the bigger picture here, and why should they care about the marshlands?
Well, the marshlands are directly linked to each one of the different components you just mentioned. If you want seafood, these coastal marshes are just key in the transport of nutrients out into the Gulf. They're rookeries for birds. They're nursery habitat for fishes. When you lay a layer of oil over an oyster reef, that's a physical barrier in and of itself, not even getting into toxic issues that you can have further down the road. So it's completely linked to the economics of the situation.
And just to go back for a second, because I want to try and get some sort of an understanding here, what can we do to clean this up? And is this going to take 20 years, 30 years to actually restore? Thoughts, opinions?
There are several different methods to clean up these wetlands, from physical removal. Obviously, they've been using extensive amounts of booms to actually intercept that oil before it gets there. We mentioned burns in coastal areas. If you have a situation where you actually have some water on the marsh, you can protect the roots of the plants. The upper vegetation can burn off, but the plants can come back. In addition to that, you can, in areas of lower concentration and decreased persistence, you can actually just let it be. Oil is organic, and it will decompose and break down over time. Sometimes leaving the marsh alone can actually be more beneficial. Some of these spots are very difficult to gain access to. Boat traffic, swamp buggies, people just walking on the marsh can tend to push that oil down into the soil deeper, pushing it into more anoxic layers where it's going to take a lot longer for it to actually break down.
Don, so what do we do at this point?
Well, manpower is important, of course, and, getting a lot of people on it. But I do think they, need to be as aggressive as they can. And I don't know if people were keeping track of it, but the number of boats that they were proudly announcing out in the Gulf went from a few hundred to almost 1,000 to now several thousand vessels out there actually collecting the oil. And that's, part of the issue is to collect as much as you can. And I think some of these remedies like Kevin Costner's machine, which actually sucks water, that could actually pull some of it out. But, it's a shame we don't have something bigger to be higher volume. But, you just need to make sure you get all the oil out. And I think part of what you mentioned was, too, is until you actually cut the oil supply off, you've got whatever number of barrels it is, if it's 30,000 or 40,000, it's heading towards shore every day. It's like a train of oil, and it's going to keep coming until we cut off the flow. And so it's critical to cut off that flow.
Well, we said in our piece at the top, too, that it's now the size of Lake Michigan, this oil slick. So even though we're doing burns, and there's cleaning, and there's dispersants, this thing still continues to grow. It's a monster out there.
Now, when they've looked at Ixtoc, although not a lot of studies were done, they found that
and that was the oil spill back in the 70s,
big oil
South
spill
America.
back in '79 off
Mexico.
Campeche, Mexico. They actually found that the ecosystems came back a lot quicker than they thought, and particularly when they compared it to the Valdez experiment or exercise there. And what they found was that because the temperature is a little bit higher down here, that the biodegradation, as you would know, is a lot faster when we have warmer waters.
They are telling me we are just about out of time, so quickly, because we posed the question at the top, it's going to have to be brief answers, and it's probably unfair. Are government and BP doing the most they could be doing? How's that for a 5-second answer?
And I want to close because we didn't really talk about the economics much, but what I think we need to think about, too, going forward, are they doing as much as they can do? They can probably always do more. I mean, it's a crisis management problem, right? I mean, that's what's really going on, Absolutely. And that's always the hard thing. In our view, though, some of the things that people are talking about doing are actually going to make problems worse afterwards. I don't agree. And I'll say this, I don't agree with the moratorium that's being discussed. I think that's a dangerous path to go. I think it's bad for the economies on the Gulf Coast. I think we all understand that there's a balance that you need between this situation and our oil and gas industry activity and our broader regional ecosystems, and
we're leaving you on that note. I hope all of you will come back and join. You got the last word. I hope you'll come back and join us again, because unfortunately I don't think this is going anywhere soon. No. Now, each week we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Simply click on the local programs bar, pick Houston 8, and you can join our online community. Read about the guests, learn more about the topic, share your thoughts and ideas, and even suggest questions that we might ask during upcoming episodes. Remember, information posted on our website may be used on air, so keep that in mind when submitting. That does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.